The world thinks it knows what happened on August 16th, 1977. A king was found dead in his castle. The official story is simple. And Elvis Presley, the man who changed music forever, died of a heart attack in his bathroom at Graceland. He was 42 years old. But the official story is never the whole story, is it? Simple story starts to fall apart. It unravels into a mess of strange details. Numbers that don't add up. Names that are spelled wrong. And actions that make no sense. It's like a puzzle where none of the pieces fit right. For every official fact, there are a dozen unsettling questions. Why was the autopsy sealed for 50 years? Why did his own father say something that fueled 1,000 conspiracies? What was in the book he was reading when he died? The day Elvis died wasn't just a sad day. It was a strange day. The events leading up to it and the things that happened right after are filled with coincidences. Some people call them just that, coincidences. It's random chance, but others see a pattern. They see clues. They see a story of a man who was desperate to escape, a man who might have planned the greatest disappearing act in history. Or maybe they see something darker, a story that hasn't been told yet. Let's look at the things that don't make sense. Let's look at the creepy coincidences surrounding the death of a king. Number 17, why was his last song a goodbye? The night before he died was just another night at Graceland, or so it seemed. Elvis couldn't sleep. That was nothing new. He had been a chronic insomniac for years. So he did what he often did. He gathered a few people, his cousin Billy Smith and his wife Joe, and his girlfriend Ginger Alden, and went to the piano in the music room. It was the early morning hours of August 16th. The sun would be up soon. He sat at the piano. His fingers, which had once pounded out rock and roll, were slower now. He played a few gospel songs. He loved gospel. It was his first music, the music of his childhood church in Tupelo, Mississippi. It was the music that won him his only Grammy Awards. He sang Unchained Melody and a few others. Then he played one last song. The last song Elvis Presley ever sang was Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. Think about that song. It was written by Fred Rose in the 1940s and made famous by Willie Nelson in 1975. It's not a happy song. It's a song about loss and departure. It's a song about saying goodbye forever. The lyrics tell a story of two lovers parting. The final lines are haunting. Someday, when we meet up yonder, we'll stroll hand in hand again, in a land that knows no parting, blue eyes crying in the rain. It's a song about death, a song about meeting in the afterlife. Why that song? Of all the songs in the world he could have played, why one that sounds so much like a final farewell? People who were there, like Billy Smith, said he sang it with a lot of emotion. It wasn't just a performance, it felt real. It was as if he was singing about himself. His own blue eyes, his own goodbyes. Skeptics will say it was just a song he liked. He was a musician. Musicians play songs. There's nothing more to it, but for a man who was about to die in a few hours, the choice feels incredibly specific. It's too perfect. Too poetic. Elvis was known for his sensitivity to the spiritual world. He read hundreds of books on religion and the afterlife. He talked about omens and signs. His ex-wife, Priscilla Presley, wrote in her book Elvis and Me about his deep belief in a world beyond this one. He believed he had psychic powers. He believed in destiny. Could he have felt something? A premonition? Did he know his time was short? Maybe he wasn't singing to Ginger or his cousins. Maybe he was singing to someone else. His mother, Gladys, died in August of 1958. He never got over her death. He visited her grave constantly. He talked to her as if she were still there. Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain is a song about meeting a loved one up yonder. Was he singing to his mother? Was he telling her he was coming home? The timing is what makes it creepy. Hours later, he was gone. That performance at the piano wasn't for a crowd. It was for a few people in a private room in the middle of the night. It was his last concert, a concert for an audience of 3, and maybe one ghost. The last note he ever sang was about meeting a loved one in a land that knows no parting. What are the odds of that? That a man's final creative act on earth would be a perfect, heartbreaking elegy for his own death. We know what he sang, but we will never know why. Was this just a random song choice, a sad tune for a sad man on a sleepless night? Or was it a conscious farewell, a message to those he was leaving behind? Did Elvis have a premonition of his own death? And did he express it in the only way he knew how? And if he knew he was going to die, what else did he know? Number 16, what was he reading when he died? The scene in the bathroom at Graceland is the final tragic image of Elvis's life. He was found by Ginger Alden on the floor. He had collapsed and died. In his hands, or on the floor next to him, was a book. The last thing he ever looked at was not a magazine or a novel. It was something much stranger. The book was titled The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus. It was a 1972 paperback by a writer named Franco Adams. The book explores the Shroud of Turin, the famous linen cloth that many believe bears the image of Jesus Christ after his crucifixion. The book is a detailed, almost obsessive look at the evidence. It uses photography and scientific analysis to try and prove that the image on the shroud is a real impression of a historical person. It tries to reconstruct what Jesus actually looked like. This wasn't a casual read. This was a book about faith, science, proof, and the afterlife. It was about finding a real connection to a spiritual figure. For a man found dead on a bathroom floor, surrounded by prescription pill bottles. It's a shocking and bizarre detail. Why this book? Elvis's spiritual journey was complicated. He was raised in the Assembly of God Church, a very emotional, spirit-filled tradition. But as he got older and more famous, his beliefs expanded. He became a seeker. He read everything he could get his hands on. He was fascinated by books like The Impersonal Life and The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. He explored numerology, theosophy, and different forms of mysticism. His longtime friend and hairdresser, Larry Geller, was his spiritual guide, bringing him stacks of books on these subjects. Elvis was looking for answers. Fame and money hadn't brought him happiness. His health was failing. His life was a gilded cage. He felt trapped. According to people like Geller, in his book If I Can Dream Elvis's Own Story, Elvis was desperately searching for a purpose beyond being Elvis Presley. He wanted to know what it all meant. Was there a God? What happens after we die? The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus fits perfectly into that search. It's a book for someone who wants to believe, but also needs proof. It bridges the gap between faith and fact. Elvis wasn't just reading about faith, he was reading about the scientific proof of faith. He was looking at a photograph that claimed to be the face of God's Son. The coincidence is the timing. He died while looking for the face of Jesus. It's like a scene from a movie. The fallen king, at the end of his life, alone in his palace, trying to see the face of his Savior. It's almost too symbolic to be real. Some might say it shows his state of mind. He was in a spiritual crisis. He was looking for redemption. His body was failing him, and he was turning to a higher power for help. Others, those who believe he faked his death, see it differently. They see it as a clue. A man reading about resurrection and a new life right before he dies and starts a new life of his own. The Shroud of Turin is about a man who disappeared from his tomb, leaving only a cloth behind. Is that what Elvis did? Disappear from his life, leaving only the image of a legend behind? The book itself is now a collector's item, not because of its content, but because it was the last thing in Elvis's hands. It's a piece of evidence from the scene. It tells us more about his final moments than any autopsy report could. He wasn't thinking about music or money or his next tour. He was thinking about God. The image is unsettling. A man who was a god to millions, dying while searching for proof of his own God. A man whose face was one of the most famous in the world, trying to see the face of Jesus. Why was this specific book about this specific subject with him at that specific moment? Was it a desperate plea for help from a man in pain, or a final symbolic act from a man who had already planned his escape? What answer was he hoping to find in those pages, and did he find it? Number 15, why did they spell his name wrong? Go to Graceland, walk through the meditation garden. You will see the final resting place of Elvis Presley, his parents, and his grandmother. Look closely at his grave marker. It's a large, flat bronze plaque. It lists his name and the dates of his life. But there's something wrong. His name is listed as Elvis Aaron Presley. Aaron. With 2 A's, the biblical spelling, the brother of Moses. It looks right. It sounds right. But it's wrong. Elvis's legal middle name was Aaron. With 1 A, it's on his birth certificate. It was the name his parents, Vernon and Gladys, gave him on January 8, 1935. They named him Elvis Aaron Presley. His twin brother, who was stillborn 35 minutes before him, was named Jesse Garon Presley. The middle names were chosen to sound similar, Aaron and Garon. It was a link to the brother he never knew. So why is his grave spelled Aaron? This isn't a small detail, it's a fundamental piece of his identity. A person's name on their tombstone is supposed to be their final official statement. To get it wrong is a major error, and the Presley family was not known for making errors when it came to Elvis's legacy. The official explanation comes from Elvis's father, Vernon. After Elvis died, Vernon was in charge of the funeral arrangements in the estate. He made the decision to use the spelling Aaron. He claimed that later in life, Elvis had expressed a desire to change the spelling to the more common biblical Aaron. He felt it was more powerful, more correct. According to Vernon, he was simply honoring his son's final wishes. This story makes some sense. Elvis was deeply religious. He was fascinated with the Bible. The name Aaron, the high priest who helped lead his people, would have appealed to him. It fits with the spiritual quest he was on in his final years, but there's a problem. There is no official documentation, no legal papers, no signed requests. There is only Vernon's word. And that's where the conspiracy theories begin. For people who believe Elvis faked his death, the misspelled name is the biggest clue of all. It's a deliberate signal. They argue that a tombstone is a legal marker. By spelling the name wrong, the family was legally and technically stating that the person buried in that grave is not Elvis Aaron Presley. It's a loophole. The body in the ground belongs to someone named Elvis Aaron Presley, not the real Elvis. It's a way of being technically honest. They are not lying. They are just not burying the man the world knew. The real Elvis Aaron Presley, they say, is alive somewhere, free from the prison of his fame. This theory was central to the 1988 book Is Elvis Alive? By Gail Brewer Giorgio. She argued that the name was a clue left by Elvis and his family for his most devoted fans to find. A secret message hiding in plain sight. Think about the psychology of it. A family grieving the sudden tragic loss of their son. Would their first priority be to change the spelling of his name on his grave based on a casual conversation? Or would they stick to the name he had carried his entire life, the name on his birth certificate, the name that linked him to his lost twin? The decision is bizarre. It opens up a huge can of worms. If Vernon was willing to change this fundamental fact, what other facts was he willing to change? The tombstone is a permanent record. It is carved in stone, or in this case, cast in bronze. It is meant to be the final truth. But Elvis's tombstone contains a lie, or at the very least, a deep and unsettling mystery. Was it an act of love, a father honoring a son's undocumented wish? Or was it an act of deception, a carefully placed clue in the greatest disappearing act of all time? Was Vernon Presley simply mistaken, or was he a key player in a massive conspiracy? If Elvis wanted to change his name, why did he never do it legally while he was alive? And could a family obsessed with legacy really allow such a glaring error to remain on the most famous grave in the world by accident? Number 14, what is the secret of the number 2? The numbers seem to follow Elvis Presley, but one number in particular seems to echo around the story of his life and death. The number 2, duality, pairs, twins, the number of division and connection. When you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. It starts at the very beginning. As Elvis was a twin, on January 8th, 1935, his identical twin brother Jesse Garon Presley was born stillborn. From the first moment of his life, Elvis was one half of a pair. This fact haunted him for his entire life. He often spoke of feeling a deep emptiness, a sense that a part of him was missing. He felt he was living for two people. In her book, Priscilla Presley describes Elvis visiting his brother's unmarked grave, speaking to him as if he were there. The duality of the surviving twin was the foundation of his personality. Then, look at his death. On August 16, 1977, there were two women who were central to his life at that moment. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, who was in the house and found his body, and his daughter, Lisa Marie, who was also at Graceland that day. Two key female figures present at the end. The emergency response involved two ambulance units. Unit number 6 from the Memphis Fire Department was the first on the scene, and it was soon joined by another. He was taken to Baptist Memorial Hospital, where two doctors, Dr. George Nicopolis and Dr. Eric Muirhead, were central to the events that unfolded. The mystery of his death is also a story of two autopsies. The first was the official medical examination performed on the day he died. The second, and more controversial, was a private investigation ordered by Vernon Presley and conducted by the Baptist Memorial Hospital. The findings of these two examinations have been the source of debate and conflict for decades. The official cause of death was given as a cardiac arrhythmia, But the second report, which remains sealed, is rumored to contain different information. Two reports, two conflicting stories. Even the conspiracy theories have a duality. The main theory is that he faked his death. To do this, he would have needed a second person, a body double, to be in the casket. The idea of a doppelganger, a second Elvis, is central to the legend. The number appears in strange, smaller ways too. His last vacation was to Hawaii in March 1977, just a few months before his death. He took 2 private jets for his entourage. The final tour he was about to embark on was scheduled to start on August 17th. He died the day before. The tour was canceled. But 2 days after his death, on August 19th, a mysterious singer named Orion gave his first performance. Orion sounded exactly like Elvis and wore a mask. He was, in a sense, a second Elvis, born from the ashes of the first. We will talk more about him later. Is this just a case of finding patterns where there are none? The human brain is designed to see connections. It's called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns within random data. A skeptic would say that if you look hard enough for any number, you'll find it. But the theme of duality in Elvis's life is too strong to ignore. It's not just random numbers. It's about the very structure of his existence. He was the good son and the rebel, the gospel singer and the rock and roll sinner, the public superstar and the private, lonely man. He lived 2 lives. It makes a strange kind of sense that his death would be wrapped in the same number that defined his birth. The twin he lost, Jesse, created a lifelong shadow. Some psychologists believe that surviving twins often feel a sense of guilt and incompleteness. They search for their lost half. Elvis searched for it in his music, in his relationships, and in his spiritual beliefs. His life was a constant struggle between 2 opposing forces. Did the universe simply reflect this internal duality back at him in the events of his death? Or is there something more to it? Is the repetition of the number 2 a coincidence or a kind of cosmic signature on the life and death of a man who was always in some way 2 people at once? Why was the theme of the twin, the double, the pair, so prominent from his very first breath to his very last? Could the loss of his twin brother have set in motion a psychological need to one day rejoin him by disappearing from his own life? Did he feel he was living a borrowed life, and did he finally decide to give it back? Number 13, who was the man in the black helicopter? In the days and months after Elvis died, strange stories started to emerge from people who lived near Graceland. They weren't just stories of grief and shock, they were stories of something more unsettling. Several different people reported seeing a black, unmarked helicopter landing on the grounds of Graceland on the day Elvis died, or very early the next morning. There is no official record of any helicopter landing at Graceland on August 16th or 17th. The Memphis police, the FBI, and the military have all stated they had no aircraft in that area at that time. So who was it? This story became a cornerstone of the Elvis is alive theory. The idea is simple and compelling. The helicopter was there for one reason: to pick Elvis up and fly him away to a new life. While the world was distracted by the drama of the ambulance and the hospital, Elvis was quietly and secretly airlifted to freedom. As Gail Brewer Giorgio, in her book Is Elvis Alive?, presents this as a key piece of evidence. She claims to have spoken to witnesses who saw the helicopter. The details are always the same. It was black. It had no identifying marks or numbers. It landed briefly and then took off. So who would have the power and resources to arrange such a secret operation? The theories point to the United States government. Elvis had a strange relationship with federal power. He famously met with President Richard Nixon on December 21st, 1970. The photos from that meeting are iconic. Elvis wanted to be a federal agent at large for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. He wanted to help fight the war on drugs, an ironic wish given his own struggles with prescription medication. The theory goes that Elvis did more than just meet the president. He became an undercover agent for the government. He used his access to the entertainment industry to gather information on other celebrities, organized crime, and anti-war activists. In the 1980s, a controversial book called Elvis, The Last Investigation by authors Bill Adelson and Bill Taylor claimed to have FBI documents proving Elvis was an informant. If this were true, it would provide a motive for faking his death. By 1977, his cover may have been blown. A criminal organization called the Fraternity had supposedly learned of his involvement and put a contract out on his life. To protect their valuable asset, the government staged his death and placed him in the witness protection program. The black helicopter was his government-sponsored escape vehicle. It sounds like a Hollywood movie script. And maybe that's all it is. There is no hard evidence to support the claim that Elvis was a federal agent. The FBI has released its files on Elvis, and while they show the government kept a close watch on him, they don't suggest he was working for them. But the helicopter sightings persist. It's a detail that won't go away. Could it have been a news helicopter trying to get footage of the house? Possibly. But news helicopters are usually brightly colored and clearly marked with their station's logo. A black, unmarked helicopter is the stuff of covert operations. This detail adds a layer of political intrigue to the story. It turns the personal tragedy of a man's death into a Cold War-era spy thriller. It suggests that the forces controlling Elvis's life were even bigger and more powerful than anyone imagined. The image of the black helicopter is powerful. It represents a secret power, moving in the shadows, able to operate above the law. It's a symbol of a hidden truth. For those who believe Elvis escaped, that helicopter is the getaway car. It's the proof that he wasn't a victim of his fame, but the master of his own destiny, pulling off one last spectacular show. So what did those people in Memphis see in August 1977? Was it a news crew, a medical transport that was never officially logged, or just a trick of the light and mass hysteria? Or was it a silent, powerful machine descending from the sky to carry a king away from his throne forever? Was Elvis a pawn in a much larger game, and was his death the final move? Well, number 12, why was the official autopsy sealed? This is perhaps the most frustrating and suspicious fact in the entire case. The official autopsy report on Elvis Presley is sealed from the public. His father, Vernon Presley, had it legally sealed for 50 years after his son's death. That means it cannot be opened until 2027. Why would a family do that? If the cause of death was a simple, straightforward heart attack, as the public was told, why hide the medical evidence? They're sealing a document for half a century is an extreme measure. It suggests there is something in that report that the family did not want the world to see. The official cause of death, announced just hours after he died by the medical examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco, was cardiac arrhythmia, a type of heart attack. He specifically stated that drugs were not a major factor. The precise cause of death was a cardiac arrhythmia, and the drugs we detected were not of a toxic level. This became the official story. Elvis Presley, a man with a history of high blood pressure and an enlarged heart, had died of natural causes. But no one believed it. Not really. It was well known that Elvis had a serious prescription drug problem. His own bodyguards, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, had just published a tell-all book called Elvis: What Happened. The book detailed his massive drug use, his paranoia, and his self-destructive behavior. It came out just 2 weeks before he died. The doctors at Baptist Memorial Hospital who performed the autopsy knew the truth was more complicated. Dr. George Nicopolis, Elvis's personal physician, was there. He knew that Elvis's body was riddled with health problems, many of them caused or made worse by the cocktail of drugs he was taking. The toxicology report found 14 different drugs in Elvis's system. While none were at a level that was considered lethal on its own, the combination was highly toxic. Codeine, Valium, morphine, Demerol, and a host of barbiturates. So, why did the medical examiner downplay the role of drugs? Many believe it was an effort to protect the family's reputation, and to protect Dr. Nicopolis, who had prescribed most of the drugs. In 1981, Dr. Nicopolis was put on trial for overprescribing medications to Elvis and other patients. He was acquitted, but the trial revealed the staggering extent of Elvis's drug use. In the first 8 months of 1977 alone, Dr. Nicopolis had prescribed over 10,000 doses of various pills for Elvis. The sealed autopsy becomes the key to the whole mystery. What is in it? One theory is that it contains evidence that Elvis died not of a heart attack, but of a massive overdose, either accidental or intentional. This would have been a scandal that the family and the estate wanted to avoid at all costs. It would tarnish the legacy of the king. Another, more controversial theory is that the autopsy reveals evidence of chronic disease. Some researchers who have claimed to see parts of the report suggest that Elvis was suffering from a host of genetic conditions, including diseases of the heart, colon, and liver. This would reframe his drug use not as simple addiction, but as a desperate attempt to manage chronic pain. And then there's the conspiracy theory. The autopsy is sealed because it's fake. It was created to provide a cause of death for a man who didn't actually die. The report had to be sealed so that no one could examine it closely and find the inconsistencies. The decision to seal the report, made by Vernon Presley, is the action that gives the most fuel to the fire. It's an admission that the simple story is not the true story. An innocent man has no need to hide the evidence. By sealing the report, Vernon created a 50-year mystery. He turned a medical document into a secret text. When that report is finally unsealed in 2027, what will it say? Will it confirm the simple story of a heart attack? Will it reveal a tragic death by overdose? Or will it contain something so shocking that it changes our entire understanding of Elvis's final days? Why would a father go to such lengths to hide the truth about his son's death, unless the truth was something the world was not ready to hear? Number 11, who was Orion? 2 days after Elvis died, the music world was still in shock. Tributes were pouring in from everywhere. Radio stations were playing his music nonstop. And then something strange happened. A small record label called Sun Records, the very same label that first discovered Elvis in Memphis, released a new single. It was a song called Save the Last Dance for Me. The artist was a singer named Orion. No one had ever heard of Orion, but when the song played on the radio, people were stunned. The voice was unmistakable. It was Elvis. It had his tone, his phrasing, his power, his vulnerability. It sounded exactly like a lost recording of the King, but it wasn't. The story got even weirder. Orion began to perform live. He wore a mask, a small Lone Ranger-style mask that covered his eyes. His costumes were flashy, just like Elvis's jumpsuits. His movements on stage were eerily similar. The mystery of Orion fueled the Elvis is alive movement like nothing else. The theory was obvious. Elvis had faked his death and was now back, performing under a new name and behind a mask. The name Orion was a clue. Orion was a famous hunter in Greek mythology who was placed in the stars as a constellation after his death. It was a story of death and rebirth. The cover of Orion's first album, titled Reborn, showed the singer ascending to the heavens. The illusion was so convincing that it caused a sensation. Was it really him? Had he pulled off the greatest trick of all time? The truth was, in some ways, even stranger. Orion was a man named Jimmy Ellis. He was an unknown singer from Alabama, and he had been born with a voice that was a near-perfect genetic match for Elvis Presley's. He didn't have to try to sound like Elvis, he just did. For years, he had struggled to have a career in music, because record executives told him he sounded too much like Elvis. No one wants a copy when they can have the real thing. But after Elvis died, everything changed. A record producer named Shelby Singleton, who now owned the Sun Records catalog, saw an opportunity. He took Jimmy Ellis, gave him the name Orion, put him in a mask, and created a myth. The myth was based on an unpublished novel by a woman named Gail Brewer Giorgio. The novel was called Orion, and it was about a world-famous rock star who fakes his own death to escape his fame. Life was imitating art. The Orion phenomenon was a bizarre chapter in music history. When Jimmy Ellis was trapped, he was famous, but no one knew his real name or face. He was living out the Elvis conspiracy theory on stage every night. He was both a tribute and a deception. Many fans believed he was the real Elvis. Others felt he was exploiting a tragedy. The story of Jimmy Ellis is a sad one. He was a talented singer who was never allowed to be himself. He was forced to live in the shadow of a dead man. In 1998, Jimmy Ellis was murdered in a robbery at his pawn shop in Alabama. The man who sounded like a king died a violent, tragic death, but the coincidence of his arrival is what's so creepy. That a man with a voice identical to Elvis's would be packaged and presented to the world as a resurrected rock star just 2 days after Elvis's funeral is incredible timing. It was the perfect storm of grief, marketing, and genuine mystery. The Orion story shows how desperate people were to believe that Elvis was not gone. They wanted a miracle. And for a little while, a man in a mask gave them one. He was a walking, singing embodiment of the conspiracy. Was the creation of Orion just a cynical marketing ploy by a clever record producer? Or was it something more? Did the universe, in its strange way, provide a substitute, a vocal doppelganger to fill the void that Elvis left behind? Could it be that the story of a rock star who fakes his death, written before Elvis died, was actually a premonition? And what does it say about fame? That one man's tragedy was another man's opportunity to become a ghost. Number 10, why did he fire his closest friends? In the summer of 1976, about a year before he died, Elvis did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He fired his three closest and most loyal bodyguards, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler. These weren't just employees, they were part of his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia. Red and Sonny West had known Elvis since they were teenagers in Memphis. They had been with him from the very beginning. They were his friends, his protectors, his brothers. The official reason for the firing was to cut costs. Elvis's spending was out of control, and his father Vernon was trying to rein it in. But the bodyguards didn't buy it. They believed they were fired for a different reason. They had become too vocal in their criticism of Elvis's prescription drug use. They had tried to intervene. They had tried to stop the enablers who were supplying him with pills. And for that, they were pushed out. Being fired was a blow. But what they did next was an earthquake. Hurt, angry, and genuinely worried about Elvis's health, they decided to write a book. They collaborated with a journalist and wrote Elvis: What Happened. The book was a brutal, honest, and heartbreaking look at the dark side of the king. It detailed his drug addiction, his violent mood swings, his paranoia, his obsession with guns, and his bizarre behavior. The book was published on August 1st, 1977. Elvis died on August 16th, 1977, just 15 days later. The timing is a coincidence of staggering proportions. When the book came out, Elvis was devastated. He felt betrayed by the men he trusted most. He saw it as a public shaming. Linda Thompson, his girlfriend before Ginger Alden, said that Elvis was devastated. He was so hurt and felt so betrayed. He couldn't understand why his friends would do this to him. The book was intended as a wake-up call. The authors claimed they wrote it in a desperate attempt to shock Elvis into getting help. They hoped that by exposing the truth, they would force him to confront his demons. Sonny West said, "We were trying to save his life, but it may have had the opposite effect. Instead of saving him, did the book kill him?" One theory is that the shame and stress from the book's publication contributed to his death. He was already in poor health. The emotional trauma of this public betrayal could have put an unbearable strain on his already weak heart. In this version of the story, his friends accidentally pushed him over the edge. But there's another darker interpretation, one that feeds the conspiracy theories. What if the book gave him the perfect cover story? If you wanted to fake your own death, you would need the world to believe you were on a path to self-destruction. You would need a public narrative that made a sudden, tragic death seem plausible, even inevitable. Elvis: What Happened provided that narrative. It painted a picture of a man at the end of his rope, a man who could die at any moment from a drug overdose. In this theory, Elvis didn't fire his bodyguards because he was angry. He fired them so they would be free to write the book. He knew what they would write. He needed them to write it. It was a calculated move. The book was the final piece of the puzzle, the public justification for the death he was about to stage. It was the perfect alibi. Think about it. The book comes out. The world is shocked to learn how sick Elvis really is. 2 weeks later, he's found dead. Everyone says, of course, we just read about it. It was bound to happen. No one questions it too deeply. The book had prepared them for the news. This turns the story on its head. The bodyguards thought they were betraying him, but they were actually helping him. They were unwitting accomplices in his great escape. The publication of that book, just days before his death, is one of the most unsettling coincidences in the whole story. It's a hinge point. It can be seen as either the tragic cause of his death or the brilliant final move in a master plan. Did the book's revelations cause a fatal emotional blow to an already sick man? Or was Elvis a master manipulator, using his friend's loyalty and concern as a tool to set the stage for his own disappearance? Was the firing an act of anger, or the coldest, most calculated decision of his life? Number 9, what did his father say? Vernon Presley was a quiet, reserved man. He was the business manager of his son's vast empire. He was protective, cautious, and not prone to public statements. But in the days after Elvis died, he said something to the press that has been quoted by conspiracy theorists ever since. He was talking about the funeral and the thousands of grieving fans. He was asked about the finality of it all. And Vernon, a man who had just lost his only son, said something that didn't sound like a grieving father. According to multiple reports from journalists who were there, Vernon said something along the lines of, "My son will be hard to replace." Or, in some versions, "Nobody will ever replace my son." On the surface, it's a normal thing to say. A father expressing pride and grief. But it's the choice of words. hard to replace. It's a phrase you use for a great employee who just quit or a favorite old car that finally broke down. It's a strange, detached, almost business-like way to talk about your dead son. Then there's the more famous and more controversial quote. Some sources claim that Vernon told a group of reporters that the body in the casket did not look like my son. This quote is harder to verify. It has become part of the mythology, but whether he said it or not, the sentiment was shared by many people who saw the body. At the public viewing at Graceland, thousands of fans filed past the open casket. Many of them were quoted in newspapers saying the same thing. The man in the casket didn't look right. His face was puffy and swollen, his nose looked different, his sideburns seemed to be glued on. He looked, some people said, like a wax dummy. The official explanation for the body's appearance was the effect of the illness that led to his death and the process of embalming. But the seed of doubt was planted. Could the man in the casket have been a body double? A wax figure? It sounds absurd, but the theory gained traction. The idea was that Elvis, needing a body for his fake funeral, used a stand-in. Some even claimed it was a distant cousin who had a terminal illness and had been paid to take his place. Vernon Presley's alleged comments are the key. If your own father says the body in the casket doesn't look like you, it carries enormous weight. It's not just a distraught fan saying it, it's the man who knew him best. Vernon's behavior in general was seen as odd. He seemed calm, composed, almost serene. Was this the quiet dignity of a man in deep grief? Or the calm of a man who knew a secret? A man who knew his son was not dead but safe. For his actions, like sealing the autopsy and choosing the errand, spelling for the grave, already painted a picture of a man who was controlling the narrative. His words, whether intentional or not, added another layer of mystery. This leads to a fundamental question about the whole affair. So the Presley family, a group of victims grieving a terrible loss, or were they participants in a massive cover-up, protecting their son and his secret? Vernon, as the patriarch, would have been the ringleader. Why would a father speak about his deceased son in such a detached way? If the body in the casket truly didn't look like Elvis, why go through with the public viewing at all? Was Vernon Presley a heartbroken father struggling for words, or was he a co-conspirator, carefully planting seeds of doubt for the world to find? Number 8. What is the secret of the John Burroughs ticket? Of all the clues that point to Elvis faking his death, this one is the most tantalizing. It involves a plane ticket, an alias, and a sighting just hours after he was pronounced dead. The story goes like this. On the afternoon of August 16th, 1977, after the news of Elvis's death had shocked the world, a man who looked remarkably like him was seen at the Memphis airport. He was with a woman and another man. He walked up to the ticket counter and purchased 3 tickets to Buenos Aires, Argentina. The tickets were one-way, he paid in cash, and the name he used for his ticket was John Burroughs. Now, the name John Burroughs is not random. It was Elvis's favorite and most frequently used alias. He used it for decades to book hotel rooms, order cars, and make private arrangements without being mobbed by fans. Everyone in his inner circle knew the name. It was his go-to pseudonym. The idea that Elvis, or someone who looked just like him, would use this specific name at the Memphis airport on the day of his death is explosive. It suggests that he didn't die at Graceland, he slipped away, went to the airport, and fled the country. This story was popularized by Gail Brewer Giorgio in her book and the 1990 TV special, The Elvis Files. She claimed to have interviewed the ticket agent who sold the tickets. The description of the man was a perfect match for Elvis. Why Buenos Aires? At the time, Argentina was a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. It was a place where someone could disappear, it was a safe haven. Skeptics have tried to debunk this story for years. They say there are no records of the ticket purchase, no flight manifests with the name John Burroughs. The airline in question has no memory of the event. It could all be a fabrication, a story created to sell books. But the story has a life of its own because it fits the narrative so perfectly. It provides the how. How did he get away? He used his old alias, paid cash, and got on a plane. It's a clean, simple escape plan. The use of the name John Burroughs is the detail that makes it so believable to so many. Why would anyone making up a story choose that specific real alias? It lends an air of authenticity to the tale. There's also a second part to the John Burroughs story. In the 1980s, a man claiming to be Elvis began to leave voice recordings for his family and for researchers like Brewer Giorgio. In one of these recordings, the man, whose voice sounds eerily like an older Elvis, says, "This is John Burroughs." He used the alias again years after his death. These tapes are highly controversial, and many believe them to be the work of a talented impersonator. But for believers, they are proof that John Burroughs is still out there. The John Burroughs ticket is the smoking gun for the Elvis is alive theory. It's a tangible piece of the escape plan. It connects the dead man at Graceland to a living man on his way to freedom. Did a grieving family member or a prankster, knowing the alias, decide to create a myth by buying a plane ticket? Or did Elvis Presley himself, disguised but using his secret code name, walk through the Memphis airport one last time on his way to a new life? Was there really a ticket to Buenos Aires? And if so, who was on that flight? And where did they go when they landed? Number 7. Why did he talk about the end? In the final months of his life, Elvis Presley's conversations took a dark turn. He became increasingly obsessed with death, the afterlife, and the idea of his own legacy. He wasn't just talking about it in a philosophical way. He was talking about it as if it were an imminent event. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, wrote about this in her book, Elvis and Ginger. On the very morning he died, they had a conversation that now seems like a chilling premonition. Elvis was having trouble sleeping. He was reading his book about the face of Jesus. He turned to Ginger and said, "I'm going to the bathroom to read." Those were his last words to her. But before that, they had been talking about the future. They were officially engaged. They had talked about setting a wedding date, but Elvis also made a strange and final sounding statement. He told her, "I've been on this earth for 42 years. I've lived a full life. I've seen and done things that most people will never get to experience." It sounds like a man summing up his life. A man who knows the end is near. He also talked about his upcoming tour. It was supposed to start the next day in Portland, Maine, but he seemed to have no interest in it. He told his cousin Billy Smith that he was tired of being Elvis Presley. He was tired of the grind, the pressure, the lack of a normal life. His ex-girlfriend, Linda Thompson, also reported similar conversations. She said that Elvis would often talk about his death. He would say things like, "I'll probably die young, like my mother." His mother, Gladys, died at the age of 46. Elvis died at 42. He was fixated on the idea of not living a long life. Was this just the talk of a depressed and unhealthy man? A man in chronic pain, addicted to drugs, who could see the writing on the wall. That's the logical explanation. He knew his body was failing. He knew he was on a dangerous path. The talk about death was a natural consequence of his physical and mental state. Or was it something else? Was he preparing the people around him for what was coming? If he was planning to fake his death, he would need to lay the groundwork. He couldn't just disappear out of the blue. He needed to create a psychological atmosphere where his death would make sense. By constantly talking about dying young, about being tired of his life, about his legacy, he was planting a suggestion. He was getting his loved ones used to the idea of him being gone. It's a form of psychological manipulation. When he died, people would remember these conversations and think, he knew it was coming, he was ready to go. It would make the event seem like a natural conclusion, not a staged disappearance. This theory paints a picture of Elvis as a brilliant Machiavellian planner, a man who was thinking several steps ahead. He wasn't just planning the logistics of his escape, he was managing the emotional and psychological aftermath. Consider the conversation with Ginger about his full life. Was that a sad reflection from a dying man? Or was it a carefully worded goodbye from a man who was about to start a new, different life? He was closing a chapter. The 42 years of being Elvis Presley were over. A new life was about to begin. The creepy coincidence is the sheer volume of these end-of-life conversations in the months, weeks, and even hours before he died. He seemed to be obsessed with wrapping things up. He was a man saying his goodbyes one way or another. Was Elvis simply succumbing to a deep depression, his words a cry for help that no one answered? Or were his final conversations a script, carefully written and performed to set the stage for his final act? Did he foresee his death, or did he meticulously plan it? Number 6, what was the secret of his mother's death? The most important person in Elvis Presley's life was his mother, Gladys. Their bond was incredibly close, almost unnervingly so. He was her only surviving child. She doted on him. He, in turn, worshipped her. Her death in 1958, when Elvis was 23 and serving in the army in Germany, was the single most devastating event of his life. He never recovered from it. Gladys Presley died on August 14th, 1958. She was 46 years old. As her health had declined rapidly, a combination of liver problems, likely exacerbated by diet pills and alcohol. Elvis died on August 16th, 1977. He was 42 years old. The dates are eerily close. He died almost 19 years to the day after his mother. The month of August, which had been a time of deep mourning for him for 2 decades, became the month of his own death. But the coincidences go deeper. Both Elvis and his mother died of heart failure. Both had enlarged hearts, both had struggled with their health for years, and both had used prescription drugs to cope. The parallels in their physical decline are striking. It's as if Elvis was following a script written by his mother's life. Elvis was obsessed with his mother's death. He felt a profound guilt that he was away in the army when she died. He preserved her room at Graceland exactly as she had left it. He would go in there and talk to her. He visited her grave constantly. He believed he could communicate with her spirit. Psychologically, this connection is powerful. Did his grief and obsession with his mother's death create a self-fulfilling prophecy? Did he consciously or unconsciously will himself to follow her path, even unto an early grave? The idea of a death anniversary reaction is a real psychological phenomenon, where people are more likely to die on or near the anniversary of a loved one's death. The conspiracy theory takes this connection a step further. It wasn't just a psychological echo. It was part of the plan. If you were going to stage your death, you would want to make it as believable and poetic as possible. What could be more poignant than for Elvis to die in the same month, and in a similar way, to the mother he adored? It adds a layer of tragic destiny to the story. It makes it feel right. The month of August was already associated with loss for Elvis. Fighting in August, he was tapping into that existing narrative. It was a symbolic act of rejoining his mother. The story becomes not just about a rock star's death, but about a devoted son finally going home. This coincidence is creepy because it feels too perfect. It's too literary. Life is usually messier than that. For a son to mirror his mother's death so closely in timing and cause feels like something from a novel, not from real life. The connection between them was the central drama of his life. It makes a strange kind of sense that it would also be the central drama of his death. Whether by fate or by design, he ensured that his story and his mother's story would be forever intertwined. Did the unresolved grief for his mother lead Elvis down a path of self-destruction that ended in the same month she died? Or did he choose the month of August for his disappearance as a final, symbolic tribute to the woman he loved more than anyone? Was he a victim of his own family history, or was he the author of his own myth? Number 5, why the life insurance policy? Lloyd's of London is one of the oldest and most famous insurance markets in the world. They are known for insuring things that no one else will, from a silent film star's eyes to a rock star's voice. They are also known for being incredibly thorough investigators. They do not like to pay out on fraudulent claims. Shortly before Elvis died, he took out a new large life insurance policy with Lloyd's of London. This in itself is not unusual for a wealthy celebrity, but a strange story emerged after his death. According to several sources, including the documentary The Elvis Files, Lloyd's of London never paid out on Elvis Presley's life insurance policy. Why not? An insurance giant like Lloyd's doesn't just refuse to pay a multi-million-dollar claim for no reason. They would have to have a very good legal reason to do so. And the best reason of all is insurance fraud. Specifically, if they had reason to believe that the insured person was not actually dead. The theory is that Lloyd's of London conducted their own private investigation into Elvis's death. They sent their own team of investigators to Memphis. These are not local police. These are world-class private detectives whose only job is to protect their company's money. They have access to resources and methods that the public can only guess at. If these investigators found any evidence of a faked death, a missing body, a fraudulent death certificate, a plane ticket to Argentina, they would have grounds to deny the claim. And according to the legend, that is exactly what they did. This is a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence for the Elvis is Alive camp. It moves the story out of the realm of fan gossip and into the world of corporate finance and investigation. a multi-billion-dollar company, believed something was wrong with the official story. The Presley estate has never publicly commented on this specific rumor. The details of their insurance policies are private. And Lloyd's of London is famously discreet. They do not discuss their clients or their claims. So we are left with a persistent and troubling rumor. If it's true, it's a bombshell. It means that a team of professional, unbiased investigators looked into the death of Elvis Presley and concluded that he was not dead. If it's false, it's a very clever and effective piece of disinformation created to lend credibility to the conspiracy theories. But let's assume for a moment that it's true. What could they have found? They would have had access to the autopsy report, or at least to the doctors who wrote it. They would have interviewed everyone at Graceland. They would have tracked down flight manifests and financial records. They would have left no stone unturned. For them to refuse payment, their evidence must have been solid. This coincidence, if true, changes everything. It means that the conspiracy is not just a theory. It's a financial fact buried in the secret files of a London insurance company. Did Lloyd's of London refuse to pay the claim on Elvis Presley's life? If so, what evidence did they uncover that has remained hidden from the public for over 40 years? And why has the Presley estate never sued them to force the payment? Could it be because they know they would lose the case? Number 4, what movie did he watch the night he died? The night before he died, after playing the piano, Elvis and his small group of family and friends went to a private racquetball court he had built on the Graceland property. They played a few casual games. After they were done, they sat down to relax. Someone put a movie on. The last movie Elvis Presley ever watched was the 1971 Clint Eastwood film, The Beguiled. This is a strange choice. The Beguiled is not a lighthearted film. It's a dark, Southern Gothic psychological thriller. Clint Eastwood plays a wounded Union soldier who is taken in by a small, isolated, all-girls school in the Confederate South. Tries to manipulate the women, playing on their desires and rivalries. But they eventually turn on him, and the film ends with his poisoning and death. Think about the themes of that film. A charismatic, powerful man finds himself trapped in a house full of women. He is a prisoner, even though they are nursing him back to health. He tries to control them, but in the end, they control him. His charm becomes his downfall. The house becomes his tomb. The parallels to Elvis's own life are chilling. Graceland was his isolated house. It was his fortress against the outside world. And it was a world dominated by women. His girlfriend, his daughter, his aunts, his female staff. He was the king of this castle, but he was also its prisoner. He was trapped by his fame, trapped by his addictions, trapped by the very people who were supposed to be taking care of him. Like the character in the film, Elvis was a master of charm and manipulation. But by 1977, he had lost control. His drug use, his health problems, his paranoia, they were the forces that were now controlling him. He was a man who was being consumed by his own life. To watch a film about a man being trapped and ultimately destroyed by the very environment he tried to dominate just hours before your own death in your own gilded cage is a coincidence that is almost too literary to be believed. Was it just a random movie choice? Someone picked a tape off the shelf, or did Elvis choose it himself? Was he drawn to a story that mirrored his own sense of being trapped and consumed? The conspiracy theory offers another angle. The film's plot is about a man who fakes his injuries and manipulates people to get what he wants. He is a master of deception. Was Elvis watching a lesson in manipulation before he pulled off his own great deception? The ending of the film is what's most disturbing. The man is killed by the very people who seem to love him. It's a story of betrayal and hidden violence. It's a creepy final movie for a man whose death is surrounded by so many questions and whispers of secrets. The last song he sang was a goodbye. The last book he read was about resurrection. And the last movie he watched was about a charismatic man trapped in a house who is ultimately killed by those around him. Taken together, these are not just random cultural artifacts. They form a disturbing, cohesive narrative. A story of farewell, a search for a new life, and a deep sense of being trapped. Why this particular film on this particular night? Was it a subconscious cry for help from a man who saw his own story on the screen? Or was it a final, morbid joke from a man who knew he was about to check out one way or another? Number 3, what happened to the blue suede shoes? Elvis Presley was buried on August 18th, 1977. He was dressed in a white suit, a blue shirt, and a silver tie. The suit was a gift from his father. He was placed in a solid copper casket, the same model that had been used for his mother. But what about his shoes? The story of Elvis's burial shoes is one of the strangest and least known of all the coincidences. According to some members of the Memphis Mafia who were there, Elvis was not buried wearing his famous blue suede shoes or even his signature boots. He was buried wearing a pair of simple black patent leather slippers, the kind of slippers you wear around the house. This detail is so bizarre, so out of character, that it demands an explanation. Elvis was one of the most famous fashion icons of the 20th century. His style was legendary. The gold lame suit, the white jumpsuits, the blue suede shoes, his footwear was as famous as he was. To bury the king of rock and roll in a pair of house slippers seems like a final bizarre indignity. Why would his family, so careful about every other detail of the funeral, make such a strange choice? One explanation is simple and practical. His feet were swollen due to his health problems, and the slippers were the only things that would fit comfortably. This makes medical sense, but it doesn't make emotional or symbolic sense. This is where the conspiracy theorists step in. They see the slippers as another deliberate clue, a signal that the person in the casket was not the real, flamboyant, larger-than-life Elvis Presley. And Elvis was famous for the song Blue Suede Shoes, a song he didn't write but made his own. The line, "You can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoes," was a statement of identity. The shoes were a symbol of his rebellious style, his pride, his very essence. To bury him without his iconic shoes is like burying a king without his crown. It's a fundamental piece of the costume that is missing. The theory is that the slippers were a sign of disrespect for the body in the casket because it wasn't Elvis. It was a stand-in, a body double. The family knew this, and so they didn't bother with the final symbolic detail of the proper shoes. They were just going through the motions. Another more psychological interpretation is that the slippers were a symbol of what Elvis truly craved: comfort, peace, a private life at home. The flamboyant boots and blue suede shoes were part of the Elvis Presley costume. The man who wanted to escape that costume would want to be buried in something simple, something private. In this version, the slippers were a final, personal statement from Elvis himself. A message saying, "The show is over, I'm going home." This detail, though small, is incredibly strange. It's a final, discordant note in the grand funeral of the king. It's a detail that doesn't fit the public image. And like everything else in this story, it can be read in two completely opposite ways: as a practical solution to a medical problem, or as a profound symbolic clue that the man in the coffin was not who he appeared to be. Why were the famous shoes of the world's most famous rock star replaced with a pair of simple slippers for his final journey? Was it a sad necessity or a secret message? What does a man's final choice of footwear tell us about the truth of his death? Number 2, what did he tell his last girlfriend? Ginger Alden was the last person to see Elvis Presley alive. She was with him in the final hours of his life. She was the one who found his body. Her testimony is crucial to understanding what happened on that night. In her book, Elvis and Ginger, she recounts the last conversation they ever had. As we mentioned, he was going into the bathroom to read, and he told her not to fall asleep. But there was another conversation earlier that night that is even more chilling. They were talking about their future. Elvis had proposed to her. He had given her a massive diamond ring. They were making plans. But then Elvis said something that seemed to contradict all of that. He told her that he had made a decision. He said that he had been thinking about his life and that he was ready for a big change. He said he was thinking about quitting the music business, retiring from touring. He might even go into a monastery or a religious community. He wanted to dedicate the rest of his life to his spiritual search. He told her, "I'm just tired of being Elvis." This is a bombshell statement. You know, it's not just a passing thought. It was presented as a firm decision. A man who was about to embark on a major tour was telling his fiancée that he was planning to quit, to disappear from public life. This conversation changes the context of everything that happened next. The conventional interpretation is that this was the talk of a man in a deep depression. He was suicidal, he was planning to end his life, and this was his way of saying goodbye. Retiring was a euphemism for death. But the conspiracy theory offers a much more literal interpretation. He meant exactly what he said. He was planning to retire. He was planning to disappear. He wasn't talking about suicide, he was talking about staging his death. This was his confession. His final act of honesty to the woman he was supposed to marry. He was telling her his plan. If this is true, it puts Ginger Alden in an impossible position. Did she know what was about to happen? Was she a participant in the plan? Her actions after his death have been scrutinized for years. Her story of what happened has sometimes been inconsistent. Was this due to the trauma of the event, or was she trying to protect a secret? The timing of this conversation is everything. For him to announce his intention to disappear from public life just hours before he died is the most powerful coincidence of all. It's not a symbol or a number, it's a direct statement of intent. This wasn't a vague wish. He was talking about specific plans, a monastery, a spiritual retreat. These are places where a person can go to live a quiet, anonymous life. If you take his words at face value, then his death was not a tragedy. It was the successful execution of a plan. He got what he wanted. He finally stopped being Elvis. This conversation is the key that could unlock the entire mystery. But only 2 people were in that room. One of them is dead. The other one has told her story. But what is the real truth behind those final words? Was this the desperate final cry of a suicidal man? Or was it the calm, deliberate statement of a man who was about to pull off the greatest disappearing act in history? Did Ginger Alden hear a suicide note or an escape plan? And what did she really know? Number 1, who was the man in the pool house? The single most compelling piece of evidence for the Elvis is alive. Theory is not a story or a number. It's a photograph. After Elvis died, his cousin Joe Esposito found an undeveloped roll of film in a camera at Graceland. As he had it developed, one of the photos has become legendary. The photo was taken on New Year's Eve, 1976, about 8 months before Elvis died. It shows Elvis with his entourage. But it's what's in the background that is so shocking. Through a glass door in the background of the shot, you can see a man sitting in what appears to be the Graceland pool house. He is a heavy-set man with dark hair and sideburns. He's wearing a dark tracksuit. And he looks exactly like Elvis Presley, but Elvis is in the foreground of the picture. The man in the background is not a reflection. The angle is wrong. He is a separate person. And he is a dead ringer for the king. This photo is known as the pool house photo. It is the cornerstone of the theory that Elvis had a body double. The theory goes that Elvis, planning his escape, found a man who looked like him and brought him to Graceland. This man was a stand-in, a doppelganger. He was being coached to walk like Elvis, talk like Elvis, and act like Elvis. The man in the pool house, the theory says, is the man who died on August 16th, 1977. He is the man who was in the casket. He is the man buried at Graceland. The real Elvis, meanwhile, was free to escape. Skeptics have tried to debunk the photo. They say it's a known member of the Memphis Mafia, like his cousin Billy Smith, seen from a strange angle. They say it's a trick of the light. They say the photo has been doctored, but the image is persistent. It is a grainy, accidental, and deeply unsettling photograph. It seems to show 2 Elvises in the same place at the same time. This photo, if it is what it appears to be, changes everything. It provides the who. Who was the body in the casket? It was the man in the pool house. It also suggests a level of planning that is staggering. This wasn't a last-minute decision. This was a long-term operation. To find a double, bring him into the inner circle, and prepare him to take your place requires months, if not years, of preparation. The photo is the most chilling coincidence of all because it is visual. It's not a story you have to take on faith. It's an image you can look at with your own eyes, and when you look at it, it's hard to deny what you see. Who is the man in the background of that photograph? Was he a friend, a relative, a stranger who just happened to look like the most famous man in the world? Or was he the key to the whole mystery, a man destined to die so that a king could live? Is this photograph the accidental proof of the greatest conspiracy in music history? And if there were 2 Elvises at Graceland, which one really died?